Welcome to Community Education Scramble Game Show. My name is Ife Chang. I'm your host. Lately, we have been doing quite a number of interview sessions. You probably have seen last couple of them are related to education. We interviewed a group of people called the Science Research Foundation supporting high school research. And previously also, you probably have seen some of the interviews with political candidates running for office. And as you know, summer is over. Time goes fast. And pretty soon, we will have the election season. And we will continue to interview candidates to bring people to you so that you can make better judgment of selecting who do you want to represent you in our state offices, particularly in Albany. Now today, we are very, very pleased. We have former Assemblyman Bob Castelli as our guest. And many of you probably very familiar with his name, and he has served in Assembly. And now he's running for the New York State Senate, okay? So let's welcome Bob Castelli. Bob?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. This is almost end of summer, and I see you been campaigning very hard. In fact, we met at the Somers Town Center the other day. I saw you, all right? And you've been sort of interviewed by a newspaper and also campaigning, meeting the people. I must say that for any political candidate, the campaigning part is the major part. You really have to reach out people. If you don't spend the time, it's hardly justified to run for the office. It doesn't just show that your heart is not in it. Am I right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are a multiplicity of methods by which you can campaign.
Right.
Certainly TV, radio, print ads, as well as sending out mail. Of course, we're always inundated with mail. Mm-hmm. Also robocalls, which many people get, which is very annoying after a while when you get more than one or two of them.
Right.
But at the end of the day, people want to see who wants to represent them. Mm-hmm. And those things are done by the candidate. Yeah, face to face. You walk up, you shake someone's hand, you tell them who you are, you let them know what you stand for. You're there to answer questions for them so they know what you're about. Mm-hmm. And, that's frequently the most important part of convincing a voter why they should vote for you.
Right. And at this time, this Senate seat, it's a very important one, as many people are aware of, that New York State Senate, that the majority, staying with Republican or Democrat, depends sometimes just on one seat.
Absolutely. This particular seat is the pivotal seat for Republican control of the New York State Senate. Mm-hmm. As you know, we have a very thin majority up there as the Republicans, and the loss of this seat will cause the entire Senate to switch over to the Democrat side. Mm-hmm. Now, what that means, of course, is that you will have a democratically controlled Assembly, a democratically controlled office of the governor, as well as a democratically controlled Senate, and therefore you won't have the check and balance that most people like to see in government.
That's right. Not only that check and balance, but I think we are in a steep slope sliding down. So where can we really get some force to change the course, or at least keep us floating?
Absolutely. Well, our founding fathers created the greatest system of governance in the history of the world, the United States of America. And they did so and intentionally created a system of checks and balance where no single party, no single entity had control over everything. So you had a loyal opposition, as it were, of individuals who were like-minded men and women, but individuals who recognized that there were different perspectives, different points of view that needed to be hashed out, brought out to the public, and allowed to be examined to determine if that was the way governance needed to take place.
Right, right, right. Now, in this hour, we hope to talk about certainly your campaign and your candidacy, but also I'd like to get a little background on this particular election, particularly the Democrat candidate. As I know that Mr. Wagner is running for this office, has been running for this office in the past and lost in the previous election, wasn't it?
Correct. Justin Wagner is a young man, very nice young man, running for the office. He's never held any political office whatsoever, any elected office. He's a young attorney from the town of Cortland, and he ran unsuccessfully against Senator Greg Ball, but it should be recognized that he ran very close to Senator Ball and only lost by a point or two. So,
that may be the incentive for him to try again.
Absolutely. It is an incentive for him to try again, and it is a point to recognize for those of us who are Republicans that want to keep this seat in Republican and more conservative hands.
That's true. That's true. Well, that's why I think it's very important for Republicans to be somewhat united in this election, and particularly in this particular office. Now we have to have a primary. We have two candidates, right? You and Terrence Murphy. In fact, Terrence Murphy, I invited him to this show, and I thought he agreed to be together with you, but for some reason that he couldn't be here, or his business have kept him away. In my opinion, the Republicans, doesn't matter who wins, we ought to keep the seat. That's fairly important. And so, towards the primary, my attitude is that we should do the best we can, put candidates in front of our Republican voters, and pick a choice, then unite it and get this person to Albany.
Absolutely. I mean, I know Terrence Murphy. We're certainly friendly over the years. I'm sorry he's not here today. We had a debate the other night, which went quite well, I think, for the both of us. But at the end of the day, the purpose of being in a primary is to give voters from our party, the Republican Party, a voice and a choice. Their voice does not need to be stifled. They need to have that voice. They need to be able to look at all of the candidates in this race, determine who has the most experience, who they would like to see as the primary Republican candidate moving forward into the general election. So, unfortunately, again, Terrence is not here because, one of the things we like to do when you have the two of us in the same place together is have somebody such as yourself as a moderator to ask us questions so you can determine the difference between the two of us on, political, philosophical issues, education issues, and so on. In many ways, we are very similar because we're both Republicans, we're both conservative in our leaning, but we are different in many ways, and those are things that, unless you see us side by side, you don't really appreciate the difference.
Well, I personally really believe in that, particularly for before primary, because that on one party, members that are debating, at least for me, I feel very comfortable because I am a Republican, so therefore I feel that on the Republican side with candidates on my show, so on, I will be very, impartial or neutral on this interview. Although I always try to be neutral and impartial, even with Democratic candidates on my show, but people might still say, well, you're a Republican. So I think before primary, I really feel that it's a mistake. Our party machinery or our party organization do not emphasize this kind of a either debate or public forum, particularly in a television. This is a free forum. I mean, you don't even have to pay for it, and citizens can watch this, and I can have this scheduled in very good hours in the prime time, Saturday, 8 o'clock.
Absolutely.
So if we take advantage of this and we let voters, really see, what kind of candidates we can put up, and that would help our party. So I personally feel that it's a mistake we we don't emphasize this, and particularly if any candidate sort of does not want to participate, try to avoid a joint session. I think that's really not only a mistake. I think it's short sight, because you really want to even you lose, still I think it's investment for future, because if you have put you out there as exposure to the public, let people know who you are, and if you persistently pursue this direction, and that's going to register.
Absolutely.
People will remember that.
I've been a member of both a town board, but also a 2-term member of the New York State Assembly.
Right.
I, for one, thank you and all the members of the media for giving us this forum. I mean, at the end of the day, you're providing us with a platform so we can get our ideas, our views, our philosophies out to our voters and all the voters we represent. And let me emphasize all the voters, because when you get elected, you're not just elected to represent Republicans. You represent Republicans
and Democrats,
conservatives, Democrats, liberals, and people want to see who wants to represent them. I think this is a great forum. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. As you know, I've never passed up an opportunity when I'm invited here.
Yep.
And one of the things I think that's important is, if you look at it from a strategic standpoint, we are now getting to our voters that much sooner than people will just in the general election. So you're in there 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before people are contesting this seriously for the general election.
Right.
So I think this is incredibly valuable, and again, I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, we certainly try hard to open this forum to any candidate, whether it's Democrat, Independent, Conservative, or Republican. So it's not that we are not trying. I think it's usually, somehow the candidates are placing their emphasis differently. Some may choose the newspaper media or mailing or phone banks, like you say. Of course, that's their choice. But on the other hand, I personally feel being on a television, speak, openly, probably still the best forum, I think, for audience watching you.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think that's part of the problem with some of the other static media, we'll call it. I mean, I've been victimized, quite honestly, by some anonymous mail that's been sent out. Terrence Murphy, by the way, in the debate yesterday, apologized for that and assured me that he had nothing to do with it. There has been some erroneous mail with some erroneous information sent out. It's pro-Cuomo, pro-Clinton, pro-abortion. None of these things are actually true. And of course, whoever sends this out, we don't know, and he agrees that he did not send it out, and I'll take his word for it, okay? There's a picture of myself, the Clintons, and the governor walking in the Memorial Day parade together. And that was sort of the way of saying, well, I'm too liberal. Well, of course, first of all, I'm a disabled combat veteran of the Vietnam War. I was the ranking member on Veterans Affairs Committee in the New York State Assembly. And that picture was taken walking in the Memorial Day parade, honoring our fallen dead from all of our wars. And I will tell you that it's my honor to walk with any elected or public official to honor our fallen heroes. That picture was taken out of context. It was put up on a mailer. And it's, these are the kind of things that turn people off on politics. I was the Republican nominee and the Conservative Party nominee 4 out of 4 elections, and the Republican office holder in the New York State Assembly 2 out of 2 times, and the Conservative Party office holder. I held both seats and both lines. So, I didn't change all of a sudden. And this is the type of stuff that is kind of dirty pool. It's like, let's debate the issues. Let's talk about the important things that concern us. Let's talk about the fact that jobs are leaving New York at record numbers. Let's talk about the fact that our taxes are the highest in the country in this county. Let's talk about the fact that we have a ridiculous housing settlement that HUD has forced upon us that we agreed to, and then they violated the contractual agreement by changing the standards in the middle of the contract. Let's talk about education and the fact that while people thought Common Core was a good idea, and by the way, I am, as you know, a former college professor. I believe in holding standards of excellence for students and teachers alike.
Right.
But Common Core was a bad idea. It was a terrible idea the way it was put forth, and it needs to be repealed. And I support the repeal of that, by the way. So these are things, along with the New York SAFE Act, which didn't make anyone safer. As you know, I also spent 21 years in the New York State Police, as well as being a Vietnam veteran. So I've got a lot of experience, both as a businessman, as a town board member, as a state assemblyman, Vietnam veteran, 21-year member of the New York State Police, and a businessman.
Certainly, yeah, you brought a lot of experience behind you.
And you know what? You need that, because in the 2 terms up in the State Assembly, I cast 3,400 votes. And by the way, I never missed a single vote. And I never abstained from a vote.
It's 3,400 votes.
3,400 votes. Never missed a vote.
This
never
is over
abstained
2
from a
terms,
vote.
right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And look, you are required to do this as a full-time job. I left 2 teaching positions in my consulting business to do this completely. In 2 terms in the Assembly, believe it or not, I had 8 days off. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day for 3 years, and 2 days to bury my mother, God rest her soul. Other than that, I was there at work 7 days a week. You have to do that. My opponent, Terrence Murphy, who was a very nice guy, by the way. Like I said, we get along. He's got a bar and a restaurant. He's got a chiropractic business. He's got a young family. And I don't know if he realizes how much of your time this eats up, but it can't be done as a part-time job. It has to be done as a full-time job.
Certainly, yeah, I fully agree. Well, maybe we should switch to another. Before I leave that, I want to emphasize, I still strongly believe before primary, I don't think any of the Republican officials, I don't care who, president or not, or shouldn't really endorse any candidate. I think the candidates ought to get together, expose themselves through public media, let people, know them. In fact, know their party. They are part of the party. It's a process not only for individual, but it's really for the party. So the primary is a very important exercise to benefit the party, not just one individual. So
It is.
Anyway, let's put that aside. Let's come to some of the real issues now. You have been campaigning and so on. We always, every year there are some standard questions or issues that are always being raised. And one of things in New York, people talk about taxes, right? That's always a issue. What else do you see now in this year that people is concerned with?
Well, I think the concern for jobs is always there, and it goes with taxes, because at the end of the day, if you have fewer jobs, you have fewer people supporting the tax base. I was fortunate enough, while I was in the Assembly for 2 terms, to be part of passing the 2% tax cap. And that was an important thing to do. Now, I will also say to you that we should have passed mandate relief with that.
Right.
We have too many unfunded mandates.
We suppose have a relief committee that is supposed to do something, but what happened to that so-called committee?
It has failed dismally. And, there's sometimes in government, the best way to address a problem and ignore it is to establish a committee.
Then let it die.
I spoke to the governor because, as you know, the governor and the Clintons were my constituents. So, I happen to represent them in that area. And I spoke to the governor when that happened. And I asked him, I said, well, you said you would give us the tax cap, and you did. And you also said you'd give us the mandate relief, and we don't have the mandate relief yet. And he said to me, he said, Bob, he says, we got everything in this session we could do. Now, unfortunately, I'm not back in the Assembly for this past term, this last year and a half. So I don't know what they are trying to do, and I'm not there to try and help stimulate it along. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons why I wanted to go from the Assembly to the Senate was because as a member in the New York State Assembly, as the minority member in the Republican Party, it was a ratio of 2 to 1, 2 Democrats to every Republican. I still got things done. And I did so in a bipartisan fashion by crossing the aisle, by making friends with people on the other side of the aisle. Now, you don't have to sacrifice your principle. You don't have to sell your soul. But what you do have to do is recognize that there are common grounds that all of you can agree on, and those are the things that will allow you to get things done. In Congress, they don't even talk to each other. That's disgraceful. People send us up there to Albany to make sure we do the job for them. Because at the end of the day, we work for you. We don't work for the people up in Albany and the party bosses.
Right.
So, you have to be able to work in a bipartisan fashion, and you can do that without selling your soul or sacrificing your principle. So those are things that you need to know how to do up there. And, in many ways, I kind of liken it to swimming with the sharks. If you can swim with the sharks and survive, you can get something done.
Right.
But if you don't know how to do that, you get eaten alive. I swam with the sharks. I survived. We got a lot done. I passed 6 pieces of my own legislation and over 35 pieces of legislation I co-sponsored. Passed both houses, signed into law by two respective governors. And I did that because I had a good working relationship with my colleagues across the aisle.
Right. But there's definitely advantage if you are able to get into Senate, though. Let's say assuming that the Republican retain the majority in the Senate, that would give you, I would say, not only more freedom, but much more sort of high probability of getting legislatures
Absolutely.
in. Right?
Absolutely. And I think, one of the reasons I went there was because I wanted to be in a house where I could be more effective for the constituents that I worked for.
Right.
I managed to be, effective in spite of the arena that I was in, although it was an honor to work there.
Right.
But being a member of the majority in the New York State Senate would give me so much more opportunity to do things for the people who we serve. And that, to me, is an exciting prospect. That's worth doing this and fighting this fight. I mean, I could have gone back to the Assembly. Many people, including people in the Senate, wanted me to do that. They offered to pay for the race, for heaven's sake. It wasn't the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to do what the people asked me to do, which was to try and serve in this seat. And at the end of the day, I'm not being driven by party bosses. I'm being driven by the people who
Right.
I
so
serve.
the key now really is focused on the people in this District 40. Now,
Absolutely.
the District 40 has been redrawn, passed by the last, assembly, I guess. Now the district has different territories now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe we should sort of talk a little bit
Sure.
about, and so people should, when they're tuning in, sometimes I tell you honestly, many people are not even know exactly which district they are in.
Sure.
And sometimes they have difficulty
it's not
even
their
to vote.
fault. We make it confusing up there.
Right.
I voted against the redistricting bill that they did, which was to gerrymander the seats, which means pick the party and stack it your own way.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, called me a hero of reform because I put in a number of important reform bills, which we'll talk about later. But the way the district is constructed now, it includes all of the town of Mount Pleasant,
Yeah.
all of the town of Newcastle, where Chappaqua
Right.
is located. It includes going to the east, the town of Pound Ridge, town of Lewisboro, town of North Salem in Westchester, moving over to the west, Somers, Yorktown, Cortland, Peekskill, over to Sleepy Hollow.
Right.
And then it goes up into Putnam County,
Right.
incorporating the town of Carmel, including Mahopac, as well as the town of Southeast and Patterson, and then finally goes all the way up into Dutchess to the
little
town of
bit,
Pauling
yeah.
and Beekman.
I see. So that's quite a territory.
It is. It's a very, very big territory, very diverse, but it's a wonderful place to serve. And, I've lived in the district for 30 years. When I was a young trooper in the state police, I moved up from New York City, came to Westchester, found that I loved where I was and never left.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned before, in this district that you not only have many Democrats, but also have a very prominent Democrat.
Absolutely.
Senate,
And I represented
Clinton
them as a
and
Republican.
Governor Cuomo, right. So I think it's really a challenge for a Republican candidate to run for this seat. So we certainly wanted the message, get to the people, particularly Republicans. If they really want somebody to represent them, they have to really go to the poll and
Absolutely.
cast their vote.
Very few people vote, which is very sad. It is one of the most sacred rights that many people have gone to war and spilled their blood for. The fact of the matter is, in general, about 50% of the population who's eligible to vote votes. Even in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, my son's lieutenant colonel in the Army Special Forces. He did 5 tours in Afghanistan, a place where if you tried to vote, you could get killed, literally.
Right.
And more people vote there by percentage than
Compare.
here.
Yeah.
Now, that's very sad.
Right.
In a primary,
That's even worse.
it's worse.
Right.
Exactly. If you get 5% of the primary voters out, you're lucky because a district like this, for instance, has 185,000 active voters.
Yep.
Out of that 185,000 active voters, you're lucky if you get 10 to 15,000 voters that come out. Now, that's sad, but in the same token, what it does mean is that every vote counts.
Right.
And-
And that's for me to interject to talk to the audience. I really want to plead to the audience. The primary really is important, and if you're a Republican, you really should go cast a vote, and hopefully we can get the percentage, say, double to 10%, 20%, because the more people vote, the candidate that is elected, is selected, will be true representative for you. And it's your right and it's your privilege, and don't miss it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is a sacred right and a sacred privilege no one should ever do. I was a young soldier at 18 years old when I got the right to vote. It was signed by Richard Nixon. I haven't missed an election since then. At the end of the day, it is a sacred right and privilege. We should always exercise that right. People should look at the candidates, learn about what they're about, determine what they need to do, who's going to govern the way they want them to govern, and then go cast a vote in a free and fair election. That's what America's all about.
Right. In fact, about a few weeks ago, I interviewed a young man who is a member of a young Republican club in a high school. And we chatted and so on. And the high school students often want to be learning the politics, so to speak, be part of the internship to candidates. And I raised a question about that. I said, well, if there is a primary, there are candidates running, how do you make the choice? And you cannot vote yet, okay? You are learning the process. I think they were never thought of, given that kind of question, never given some thought to it. So our end of discussion really made them realize, you should really stay neutral until the primary is over, because if you are a Republican, you want to help the Republican Party, you want to learn the process, you're not really trying to identify a person early on. It doesn't make sense.
Absolutely.
Particularly, you have no vote. I can't cast a vote yet, right?
Well, I think, one of the things you look at in a primary is this. You're talking about members of your own party. So for all intents and purposes, these are people who are your men and women, okay? Secondarily, you need to determine which of those individuals has the experience to govern well, the background to do so, the philosophy that you like that governs the way you'd like them to govern, and then secondarily, which is very important, who do you think can win the general election? Because you can win a primary and lose the election. It's sort of like winning a battle and losing a war. At the end of the day, if you don't pick the person who's got the best chance of winning, somebody who's a proven performer, who's a proven winner, well then,
track record.
You've made a political statement by casting a vote in a primary, but your person lost. And you don't want them to lose. At the end of the day, you want the seats held by the members of your own party who share that philosophy.
Right.
So
Right.
that's important.
Well, that's good. At this point, maybe I think I should ask a little bit more about your personal background and experience that you can emphasize to the audience. So I know you have a long history of a distinguished career.
Thank you. Well, as you know, I've spent all of my life in the service of my country and my community. I dropped out of high school at 17 years old, enlisted in the Army, volunteered to go to Vietnam, served in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive in 1968 and then during 1969, came back. I was an infantry sergeant. And then, as I like to tell my college students years later, always remember one thing: when you drop out, drop back in. I did drop back into school. I completed a couple of undergraduate degrees in criminal justice.
Hopefully you have GI Bill to help you a little bit.
I did have the GI Bill. And you know what? That's something for those of you who are veterans out there. And I thank you all for your service. And I say to all the veterans, welcome home for those who have gone to war. We owe you a debt of gratitude that's not repayable in this lifetime. But we do have the GI Bill. We do have the VA. We want our veterans to work on that because, as the ranking member on Veterans Affairs in the State Assembly, this was one of the jobs to make sure they got that. So came back, was a soldier, remained in the military for a while, finished my high school, got 2 undergraduate college degrees, went into the New York State Police for the next 21 years. Served all over the state of New York. I was a trooper in Somers, a trooper in Hawthorne, part of this district,
Oh,
a
I
trooper
see.
in Lewisboro.
Interesting.
So, served here. Then I finished up in the Organized Crime Task Force. Left the New York State Police. When I finished, I went to graduate school at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. And I was fortunate enough to get a graduate degree from Harvard and was named a Pickett Fellow in Criminal Justice Policy and Management by the National Institute of Justice in light of my contribution to the law enforcement community for 20 years.